So for this DIY, you'll need some tinsel and some baubles. I did purchase some of these baubles from Poundland recently, but everything else is pretty much recycled. I also purchased from Poundland a 25cm foam wreath. You'll also need some sellotape and some double-sided sticky tape, some scissors, some string, some super glue, and I originally thought I would have needed some push pins, but actually I didn't need these in the end, so forget about this. And so what you want to do is, taking your foam wreath and your double-sided sticky tape, you just want to cut about 2 centimeters in length, I would say, your double-sided sticky tape, and tape these all around your foam wreath. And then once you've done that, then you want to take your tinsel and then just stick this carefully as you go around. And as you work your way to the top of the wreath, just make sure you're adding more double-sided sticky tape and sticking down that tinsel so it's all secure and covering the entire wreath itself. So then next what I did was I just took some of that super glue and glued it at the back of each bauble and stuck it down, and what I found was that actually trying to open some space so you're exposing the foam, it was a lot easier to stick down the bauble instead rather than doing it on top of the tinsel itself, so it wasn't pulling the tinsel off. But I was going to freehand this, but actually what I found was a lot easier was kind of first organising and rearranging the baubles around the wreath, so that I was happy with what it would look like, and then taking that super glue, gluing each bauble down carefully. So once that was done and it was dry, it ended up looking something like this. And finally, you just want to take your piece of string. I didn't purchase this from Poundland, but this was purchased from Wilko and it was really cheap. I cut this up and then I stuck this using sellotape at the back of the wreath itself. However, when I did hang this up and tested it out, I did find that actually the sellotape wasn't strong enough, but I haven't filmed this part. So what I did was I went over it with a glue gun, trying to secure that in place so that it wouldn't fall off really. So yeah, once that's done, your beautiful wreath is ready, and it really did not take that long to make. So before you start thinking about throwing some old decorations out, maybe think to see if you can repurpose it when trying to make a wreath itself, because the way this turned out, I absolutely love it and I hope you do too. So for this DIY, you will need a foam wreath, which is 25 centimeters in width, and this was purchased from Poundland. You'll also need some sellotape and some string. You'll also need some yarn to create the pom-poms, and all the yarn used for this DIY was actually purchased from Poundland. You'll also need some scissors and some super glue, and you'll also need a pom-pom maker. So originally I thought that the 5.5 centimeter pom-pom maker, which is in pink here, would be enough, but actually this was too big for the size wreath I was actually using. So the perfect pom-pom maker size you would need is the 3.5 centimeter pom-pom maker, which is in teal color here. You'll also need a glue gun, and I realized actually you needed a glue gun towards the end because super glue wasn't enough to stick the pom-poms down, but you do need the super glue anyway, because if you are going to stick on the cutout Christmas letter as I did, which I'll show you towards the end, then you'll need the super glue to stick this down. So yeah, that is what you need for this DIY. So this was actually my first time making pom-poms, but I'll teach you a few of the techniques that I used to create some of these different effects. So for this first technique, what I did was I first did 2 layers around the pom-pom maker, firstly in white, then 2 layers in purple, and then 2 layers in blue, and then I repeated this on the other side of the pom-pom maker. And then what I did next was I folded that pom-pom maker to try and close it, and then taking those scissors, I then cut around this on both sides, and then just taking some excess yarn that was left, I cut this off, placed this and wrapped this around the center, and did a few tight knots around this, just making sure that that was fully secure in place. And then what I did was I then opened up the pom-pom maker and carefully removed this. And then as you can see, it's not even around this pom-pom ball that you've just created. So taking those scissors, I then smoothed this out by just cutting off any excess yarn that was sticking out. And then once that's done, your pom-pom should look something like this. So here you can see that it's got those 3 key colors that I used, and it kind of gives it that nice mixed colored effect. And the next technique I used was that 2 coloured effect. So one half of your pom-pom is one colour and the other half of your pom-pom is another colour. And so what I did was, taking some blue yarn, I wrapped this all the way around that first semicircle of that pom-pom maker and covered that up, and then cut this off. And then I did the same on the other side with purple yarn, making sure that was completely covered. And then next, again, I just closed that pom-pom maker and then took my scissors and then started cutting through the middle, all the way around. And then what I did was, I then, again, using some excess yarn that was left over, I cut that and then made sure I tied this all the way around in the center, making sure I did about 4 tight knots just to make sure that was all secure in place. And then once I was happy with that, I then opened up that pom-pom maker, carefully removed this out, and then exactly as the first technique, I just made sure, taking those scissors, that I smoothed around the whole pom-pom by just cutting off any excess yarn that was sticking out. So then once that was done, it ended up looking something like this. And so the third technique actually was pretty simple, because Poundland sell this kind of rainbow effect yarn, which I absolutely love. So all you need to do is just wrap both sides of your pom-pom maker as you did in your previous crafts. You don't need to think about using different types of yarn, because you get that different coloured effect with this yarn alone. So I made sure both sides were covered, and then once that was done, I then closed the pom-pom maker as much as I could, and then taking those scissors, I cut through the centre all the way around. And then again, with some excess yarn, I cut this and then I wrapped this around that pom-pom maker through the centre, making sure that that was tightly knotted in place. And I did about 4 knots again, just as much as you can. So this depends on how you feel with the size of the pom-pom you're making. And then once that was done, I then opened up that pom-pom maker carefully, removed this out, and then, yeah, again, with any excess yarn that was sticking out, I just used scissors to cut this off and smooth it, so it created that cute ball effect. And once that was done, it ended up looking something like this. And so for the final technique, I actually took 3 different coloured types of yarn, so white, purple and blue, and I kind of aligned these as one. And then what I did was, I just wrapped this all around that pom-pom maker on both sides, and because you're using more yarn in one go, it was actually a lot quicker to wrap around. And then once that was done on both sides, I then closed that pom-pom maker again as much as I could, then took those scissors and cut this through to the center all the way around. And then again, with some excess yarn, I cut this off, wrapped it all the way around the center of that pom-pom maker, and did about 4 tight knots all the way around, making sure that that was secure in place. And once I was happy with that, I then carefully removed that pom-pom maker. And once I did that, I then, again, taking those scissors, just cut off any excess yarn that was sticking out. And so once that was done, your pom-pom should look like this fluffy firework with all these different colours kind of sprouting about. So yeah, this is probably one of my favourite techniques that I learned and wanted to use as part of this DIY as well. So yeah, if you're using a 25cm foam wreath and a 3.5cm pom-pom maker, then you will need to make 42 pom-poms out of this to cover your entire wreath. For actually gluing this down, I didn't want the colours to clash too much or put the same colours next to each other. So what I first did was, I just took each individual pom-pom and kind of aligned this around the wreath first with that first layer, making sure I was happy with the layout and the colours that were aligned. And then once I was happy with that, I then took out that glue gun and then started gluing this down one by one. And once that first layer on the bottom was done, I then did this and repeated that same process on the top, making sure that the entire wreath was covered in pom-poms. And if you have watched any other pom-pom wreath making videos, you might have noticed that actually some people do glue down yarn around the entire wreath before sticking on the pom-poms. But to be honest, I found that the glue gun was really strong and I didn't need to do that, and the pom-poms held on perfectly. So if you do want to skip that like I did, then you can. And next, so that this could hang up nicely on your wall, you do want to add and glue down some string that you have and stick this on the back of your wreath. But again, what I found was that the weight of the wreath, even though it was light, still the sellotape wasn't enough by itself. So yeah, just to really make it strong and stay on, you could also use the glue gun to stick down that string as well at the back end, which I found useful. And then finally, just to make this look Christmassy, I just had a Christmas glitter cutout which I got from Hobbycraft years ago and I just never used. I thought this would be perfect to stick this in the center. So again, using that super glue that you had earlier, I just glued this down carefully on the sides, and once that was done, your beautiful wreath is ready.